Hello everyone and welcome to the Book Cafe. Tonight we're uploading the third installment of our interview with John Joseph Adams, the editor of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines and the John Joseph Adams imprint. There'll be a link to the previous video at the end of this one, and I hope you all enjoy. I am a little surprised that you said that you wouldn't want to start your own magazine, considering that a few years later you did exactly that with Nightmare. So what changed? Where did the idea for Nightmare magazine come from? And here's another interesting question related to that. Why did you choose to use Kickstarter to get it funded as opposed to a more traditional channel?
Right. So with Nightmare, though, although I did launch the new magazine, I actually did have a partner with that initially. I was partnered with Creeping Hemlock Press, so I did have a financial backer who was providing the money, and so I was. That's how it started. I was just going to be the editor, and they were going to be the publishers, and so that's how it began. At that time, I was actually already the publisher of Lightspeed. I had already, taken over that role from Sean Wallace. But I didn't want to have another one on top of it. So it's like, okay, well, I was interested in doing Nightmare, but I didn't want to have to take on those additional publishing responsibilities. So I partnered with Creeping Hemlock. And then we decided to do a Kickstarter just because, Kickstarter existed at that time, whereas when we launched Lightspeed, it didn't. And it just seemed to make sense. It's like, well, sure, we could just start at zero and try to, get a bunch of subscribers and everything and start from there. Or we could, pre-sell subscriptions and get a bunch of seed money for the magazine before we launch it. And, that seemed like just a no-brainer to do at that time. Especially since, there hadn't been a lot of magazines that had actually kickstarted at that time, so we decided to give that a shot, and it worked out. We funded and got a little bit over what we were asking for, so that was good. Eventually Creeping Hemlock decided they didn't want to keep their stake in the game there, and so but based on my previous experience with Lightspeed, it's like going into the partnership, we had an agreement that if they ever decide they want to get out, we had an escape clause basically, so that it's like, okay, well, you can just hand it all over to me and I'll pick up the reins and run with it. That way I wouldn't be stuck in a position where it's like, it's complicated, whereas when I ended up acquiring Lightspeed, it was a little bit complicated. It worked out. But it was one of those things where it's like, okay, well, I spent all this time and effort building this thing, but then now I'm in this complicated position of, having to suddenly take on this role and that kind of thing. So, so I had contingencies with Creeping Hemlocks in order to make that transition easy if it was necessary. But of course, I was hoping that it wouldn't be that they would. Stick around and be publisher, but I understand. Not everyone's going to be in this kind of thing for the long haul, and I've managed to make everything work, so I'm pretty pleased with it. It's at this point I actually really value the total control freedom that being the publisher offers me. I could just do whatever I want with either magazine. Any idea I get, I can implement. Even if it's like, okay, well, that's kind of stupid. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's my magazine. I can do whatever I want. Whereas when you have a publisher or something, it's like, okay, well, maybe they'll overrule you on this or that, or it's like, sure, I can buy whatever I want, but maybe any kind of marketing thing I want to try, it's like, I have to get permission and that kind of thing. So it's like, I like having the freedom at this point, since I've been able to make it, financially successful. It's like, neither magazine's ever been a financial burden. So that's been good. It's only cost me my time. They've always been financially solvent. So it's never been one of those things where I have to consider like, oh, well, how much money do I want to lose on this month? It's always been, they've always been in the black, not making a ton of money, but, but not costing me money. So,
and is that sense of control why you ended up making the John Joseph Adams imprint? If you were being successful with magazines, why go into
yeah, so they came to me. I mean, after a fashion. So it's like, so prior to the John Joseph Adams books imprint, I did start Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, which is also with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and so that was something I pitched to them. So so it started with me pitching to them. But so we convinced them to start the series, and so the publisher was very happy with the first volume, and then my agent started talking to them about, well, it would be great if you guys did more science fiction and fantasy, and the publisher was agreeing, and my agent sort of suggested, well, you got John Joseph Adams doing the series editor thing over here for Best American, so why don't you talk to him? And so then that got the conversation started, and so basically they approached me about it, and suggested it, and so I mean, basically I agreed to do it because it's like, okay, well, I mean, as happy as I've been with my work in short fiction, it's always been kind of a much more variable game in terms of like making a living at it. It's like there have been years where it's like it's been pretty good, and other years where it's not been so great. And like I said, with the magazines, it's like, okay, I mean, they're not losing any money, but they're not like making a ton of money. So it's not like I could edit just the magazines and be like living comfortably. It's like not by any stretch. Even if you add in like income from different anthologies, it's like, okay, well, depending on the year, like if I edit 6 anthologies in a year, it's not really a great total bottom line. I mean, and it was just too good of an opportunity to pass up, because it's like, okay, well, first of all, it's like I don't have to move to New York. I can do this remotely. I don't actually have to do a lot of the sort of administrative stuff that editors typically have to do. Like, I don't have to go to meetings and stuff all the time, because I'm remote, and I don't have to do the P&Ls. My boss in-house does the P&Ls and everything, and so it's like there's a lot of like BS that's involved with being an editor typically at a publishing house that I actually don't have to do. And it's also nice from, I think, the publisher's point of view, because it's like, well, that's not necessarily my skill set. Whereas like curating books and like editing books, like that is my skill set. So it's like, if I can devote my time to that entirely, that's actually best for both of us. So yeah, I mean, that's why I decided to go for it. I mean, it's like, the opportunity was presented to me, and it seemed like a good thing to try, and it's like, I mean, as much as I love short fiction, I always have loved novels, and I would, as I mentioned earlier, I would have gladly worked in novel publishing. It's just an opportunity never really presented itself. Now that I have this opportunity where it's like, oh, well, hey, it's like too good to pass up, basically. It's like and plus, because the other thing was that they only wanted me to do like 7 to 10 books a year, and so with that workload, I could still basically do almost everything else I'd already been doing. It's like, so basically, I mean, I'm very busy now, doing all the things that I'm doing, but it's like when I look at my work and my production, it's like, okay, well, I cut out a couple anthologies a year that I would be doing otherwise, probably. And so my net production is actually up. I'm actually working on more material, putting out more stuff, and I'm making more money. But the loss of production is really just like, okay, well, I still release like 2 anthologies every year, including Best American, which is a huge amount of work. So it's like, arguably it's better for my career to actually only do like 2 anthologies a year rather than 6. It's like kind of a lot to have like 6 come out in a year or something. Just because it's like, okay, well, as much as you might have a fan base, it's like, well, at a certain point it gets kind of hard to promote them all, or to space them out on the schedule enough so that they're not getting in each other's way. I mean, even if they have different themes that aren't really in conflict with each other, it can be tricky. So yeah. So anyway, that's that. Yeah, it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. And it turned out to be a really good thing because my wife actually had a really good tech job, and then she got laid off shortly after I got the job. So it was very fortunate that I had gotten that and could basically replace her lost income. And she's a writer, so we decided, okay, well, we can give her opportunity to really devote her time to that, and instead of trying to get another tech job or whatever. So yeah, we were pretty pleased with that because she was also very miserable in that job. So yeah, it all worked out.
So you've been doing JJ for you've been running this imprint for a few years now.
Yeah.
Of the books you published so far, which was your favorite? Which was the one that gave you the most oomph?
Well, I mean, I can't really name favorites. It's like if you have like several children, and then someone's like, come on, just tell me on the deal, like which one's your favorite? One of them's your favorite, right? And it's like, I mean, obviously there's some that like excite me, that like excited me more than others, but like I shouldn't really say. Yeah, I mean, it's too hard. It's like, how am I supposed to pick between all my different children? I mean, it's like they're all my children. I mean, I will say that Brian Camp's novel just came out, so let's talk about that one. That one's I was very excited about that one, obviously, as I was with all of them. But it's been getting really great reviews, and like I said, just came out. But yeah, I don't know. I can't single them out.
So Brian Camp?
Yeah.
Which novel is that?
The City of Lost Fortunes. I guess I should say the name of it.
Right.
That's the City of Lost
New Orleans
Fortunes.
one.
What's that?
That's the New Orleans one.
Yeah. So it's a urban fantasy set in New Orleans in 2011. So sort of a couple of years after Katrina, the city's still sort of recovering from that trauma, and Jude Dubuisson is a magician with a talent for finding lost things, and he gets roped into this game with the gods of New Orleans for the heart and soul of the city, more or less. So yeah, it's really great. It's really clever. It's got a lot of it's got really great prose. It does this whole thing with syncretic myth. Which is a concept I had never actually encountered before, but it's like the idea that there's these different myths that appear in all these different mythologies, but like seemingly unconnected from each other. Where like in Norse mythology you'll have this one sort of myth, and then in like Egyptian mythology or something you'll have a very similar myth, even though it seems like they're very unlikely to have encountered each other. And sure, like. Mythology A borrowed it from mythology B, and that's how that happened. But in some cases, it's like parallel evolution, so he has all these different sections that open up a couple of the different chapters that is just like doing a deep dive into these different syncretic myths, and then they're really evocative and interesting. So, but then otherwise, yeah, just the main storyline is really great too. It's kind of American Gods-esque in a lot of ways. But
does sound like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love it a lot. So
cool. Now your the first original novel that your imprint acquired and published is Bannerless,
right.
And that's the one it won the Philip K. Dick Award. So how did you end up acquiring that book? And what has that book winning the award done for your imprint?
I published Carrie a ton, and actually, so the world of Bannerless first appeared in her short story Amaryllis, which appeared in the first issue of Lightspeed, and that story actually got nominated for the Hugo, and so it was like, So this is kind of a wonderful sign, right? Like, so Carrie and me go way back to issue 1 of Lightspeed. The first issue had her story, the first story set in this world. It got nominated for Hugo. So it was like good beginnings, right? And then now the first original novel I acquired for the imprint is by Carrie Vaughn. It's set in that same world. And then lo and behold, eventually it does win an award. It won the Philip K. Dick Award. Sort of in that way, it's like, oh, that's a really cool parallel. I've published Carrie a ton over the years. Like, I was recently just, I'm actually working on a special issue of Lightspeed because issue 100 is coming up. So that's in September, and so we're basically just doing like a supersized issue for that one. But because of that, I was sort of doing some research to see who are the authors who have appeared in Lightspeed the most? And Carrie's I think she was the second most frequent contributor. But then of course I published her in other magazines too. I published her in Nightmare. I've also published her in several of my anthologies. We've done a lot of work together, and so when it came time to shop her new novel, obviously. I was someone that she was interested in sending it to, so I was very thrilled to get it. We actually bought it on proposal, so I'd only read. It was very interesting as a very new novel acquiring editor to have my first actual book that I try to acquire like that. I don't even get to read the whole thing, so it's so it was we had, I don't know how many, probably 30,000 words or something like that, plus, a synopsis. But she published, probably 20 novels or something by that point, and she's been a New York Times bestseller. So, that those things happen from time to time. You buy something on proposal like that. That's how we ended up with it. But, it was great for the imprint to have won the award. It's especially nice that it's, it's the first book that we published in the imprint. Any award is it's always great. And it's sort of questionable, how much does it really mean for sales or whatever? There's always that question. And that still remains to be seen. But I think it'll certainly help, raise the profile a little bit. It'll make it'll be good for the imprint to show hey, we're actually publishing award-winning fiction right out of the gates. So it's hard to say this soon after it happened what the overall effect will be, but I think good signs.
How related was Amarillo to Bannerless and to what would eventually become Bannerless, and how much of the proposal ended up being represented in the final product?
So Amaryllis is pretty divorced from Bannerless. It's clearly set in the same world, the same sort of post-climate change, post-apocalypse. So in the novel, there's all these quotas for people who have to, they have to produce a certain amount of work for the community, or goods for the community and stuff, and then you can sort of earn the right to procreate, and because you've proven that you can provide for the child and this and that, as a way to keep resources under control and everything. And so in Amaryllis, it's it sets up the whole stage for that. It lays it all out. So it's very closally tied to Bannerless in that respect, but it doesn't involve an investigator or anything. It's about a woman who's on a fishing ship, and their quota situation is how much fishing do they do, and they're not allowed to overfish because they want to keep the environment suitable for long-term survival and everything. So it's very different in that respect. But then, so Carrie actually had a different story called The Bannerless that appeared in my anthology. The End Is Come, which is part of the Apocalypse triptych, and so Bannerless, the short story, actually features the same character, same protagonist, Enid, but it's actually unrelated to the novel. Otherwise, it's not the novel's not an expansion of that particular story. We just sort of borrowed the title. So the story Bannerless is kind of like a later case of Enid, the investigator in Bannerless in the novel. So yeah, the short story is a like sort of a later case of hers, whereas the novel Bannerless is basically her first case as an investigator. Um, and so yeah, so that's how they're related.
Alright, and we have to stop there for the night. We'll be uploading the next part of the video on Friday, so stay tuned for that. Remember to like this video, click on the dragon to subscribe, and watch the other parts of the interview here. We'll see everyone on Friday, and until then, read good fantasy.